Terry, you were at the Natural History Museum in Dublin during the week. I thought it was closed.
Well, it is. It's closed to the public, and it was open to me, Derek. The Natural History Museum, or the Dead Zoo, as it's often referred to, or sometimes it's referred to as a stately home of death. It was built in 1856 and it was opened to the public in 1857, and it was opened by this famous Scottish explorer, Dr. David Livingstone, before he disappeared off into the African jungle. Now, this museum is like stepping back in time. It's got those fantastic Victorian cabinets in it, which have outstanding examples of wildlife from Ireland and across the world. And of course, as you walk in the door, the two giant Irish deer skeletons are there, and they're among the most famous and distinctive animals in the whole museum. And the skeleton is huge, and the antler span is massive, something like 3.5 metres. Other notable items in the collection are the Blaschka glass animals. These were made in Dresden in Germany by father and son glassmakers Leopold and Rudolf Blaschka. These glass models, they're an excellent way of displaying animals like anemones and jellyfish, animals which are extremely difficult to preserve. However, for a number of years now, the ceiling has been leaking, and a major renovation is underway to repair it. A €15 million plan has been initiated to renew the roof and to modernise facilities and to improve accessibility. Needless to say, a large number of exhibits have been boxed up and removed from the museum for safekeeping during this essential work. And as you've already said, Derek, the museum is closed to the public. But I got special privilege to go in and see how the work was progressing. I met up with Nigel Monaghan, who's keeper of the museum, and curator Paolo Viscardi.
Terry, how are you doing? Come on in.
Nigel, this is the first time I've ever come to the Natural History Museum and I had to ring the doorbell. It's always been open, but you're closed.
Yeah, we'd normally be open 7 days a week, but we've had the front door shut, obviously through COVID times, but also because we're doing major work inside the building. And as you'll see, it's not set up for visitors at the moment.
OK, lead me on.
Well, if you come in this way, you can see your normal entrance point and your normal giant deer.
Oh my God. I can't see the deer. That's the first thing I'll say.
Well, the giant deer have been moved back and crated up in a special way that we've braced the skeletons so that we can move them safely. Because as you can see, we're starting to fill the ground floor with props that are holding up the floor and taking the weight of a big scaffolding system on the top levels of the building.
And what's it all in aid of?
This is all in aid of sorting out the roof. We've got an 1856 construction here. We don't have original drawings, which is one of our challenges. So we're trying to work out how the building works. And our roof, understandably, is effectively at the end of its life cycle and needs to be restored to that original design. And it will look the same, it'll be very much the same, but it'll be waterproof, weatherproof, and it'll be, in some ways, a bit technically smarter.
Now, this museum has always been a quirky museum. The Dead Zoo, as it has been referred to. Very little technology in it, no hands-on, no computers. You walk in here, you're surrounded by thousands of real exhibits. I was going to say real live exhibits, but real dead exhibits.
There's a lot of eyes following you around the room as you walk through, certainly, Terry.
Even today there is. I can see them here. I can see all the seabirds. I see pheasants there behind me. But they're already in cases, so they're protected.
Yeah, the ground floor area is not going to be a dust haven, whereas there's bound to be a lot of dust and dirt generated on the upper floors.
OK, well, let's ramble through and see how much of it I recognise from the last time I was here, because as I'm walking along the ground floor here, this was referred to as the Irish exhibits here. I see now there's your the giant Irish deer there. But everything else is closed in. I can see the scaffolding and I can see the basking shark hanging from the ceiling.
Yeah, the basking shark has been here since the 1890s, hanging from this ceiling. The very first photographs of the ground floor of the building show the basking shark in place. But in fact, it wasn't the Irish room until about 1910. So the entire ground floor, for most visitors over the last decades, has been all about Irish animals. So it starts with the giant deer skeletons facing you as you walk in the door. And they are now decapitated with skull and antlers tucked in between exhibits. And the skeleton surrounded by what we call a stillage, which is basically an open crate frame. And we tie the skeleton to that as a brace. so that it doesn't wobble as we move them around. So we've had to move the giant deer back to fit in between the legs of scaffolding systems. And you can understand when you see all this scaffolding, this is why you can't have an open museum that's ready for the public for a while.
You must have come across some real curiosities.
We have done. I mean, we've been working on this since June 2020, and we spent 10 months with a team of about 10 of us all together, dismantling, wrapping, packing and shipping out collections. And in the process of getting into every nook and cranny and corner of the museum and under a lot of display cases and into the boxes that the things like the elephant and the giant deer sit on. And we found old newspapers, we found bits of uniforms that would have been worn by the gallery staff maybe 50 years ago. One of the pairs of shoes is still very shiny. And we found dust and dirt and debris, some of which were able to go through, in particular inside the skull of the elephant, where we were finding railway tickets and wrappers from food with old currency.
So people were walking by these exhibits and just literally dropping coins into the skull?
Yes, there's coins, there's all sorts of things. So we've had an elephant skull acting as a trash basket for about 50 years or more.
OK, well, let's ramble up a bit further. Oh, my God, this has definitely changed.
This is probably the greatest shock for people who know this building well, like you, Terry, in that you're walking up, you've come through the top of the stone staircase, and instead of a very large display case with kangaroos and wombats staring back at you, there's a patch on the floor of dirt where that case has sat since the 1890s when it was constructed.
And the giraffe, I can't see him either.
The giraffe has left the building, and so have many exhibits that are light enough and easy enough to move. They weren't necessarily that light, and it would take several strong people to push them on wheels to get them to what is now a doorway at first floor level, but used to be a window. And we've opened that up so that we could get out the rhinos, the giraffe, the walrus, and some of the other exhibits off the main floor.
And where have they gone to?
They've all gone into our Collections Resource Centre, because that's where we need to work on them behind the scenes over the next few years, and also where we can keep them in good environmental conditions. So there's a lot of stuff has to be moved in order to restore a building. When you think that there's 10,000 exhibits and there was a lot of stuff in storage as well, Paolo Viscardi, who's been leading the emptying of the building on those upper floor levels, has done an estimate, and we think there's about 20,000 animals have left the building in the last year.
OK, can we move on to see Paolo? Because I know he's packing up animals to move out. Is that right?
Well, Paolo's job over the last year has been to empty the balcony levels. And that's been quite complicated because we've also got to protect against building works. Because as you can see, there's a lot of big timber box work here, and there's also a big scaffolding system. And that was put in place to take down 2 whale skeletons, which were the core of the project that Paolo had to look after.
OK, let's go. You lead me to him.
Well, now we're up on a large scaffolding system, and this is Paolo Viscardi, who's responsible for this being in place.
Paolo, it's a long time since I've seen you. The last time I saw you were in a little office way down there, but now I'm up in the middle of the air, so to speak. I'm on this large platform. Explain.
Yeah, this is the platform that we used to take down the whale specimens which were hanging from the ceiling. So you may not remember, but there were 2.
Oh, I do.
One very large whale, a big fin whale, and then there was a smaller humpback whale, which was a young one. And obviously, to get those 2 large objects down, we had to build all of this framework so that we were able to get up above the cases, because there's still cases directly below us, and then take the whale down in sections. So they had to be dismantled, taken off site through the small hole in the wall
that we saw earlier on.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's quite small compared to the size of those whales.
Yeah, so the fin whale in particular, the skull was 4.5 metres long, weighed about half a tonne for the top section, another best part of half a tonne for the lower section. So we had to take it into 2 sections, make sure they were very carefully boxed up, and they had wheels, so that we were able to actually very easily guide them out through the building. But everything was precarious angles and carefully engineered to make sure that it was stable. It was a massive undertaking.
Was it difficult taking all these bones apart and labelling them?
It wasn't the easiest of things, because the whale itself, the big fin whale, was not entirely made of bone. So a lot of the pieces of it had been constructed to replace probably some rotten bones which had not kind of survived the process of being prepared properly. Whales are very, very notorious for keeping hold of grease inside the bone, and that can go quite rancid and quite unpleasant. So it looks like they replaced some of the extremities, which are the ones which will get kind of nasty first.
And did you know that?
No, we had no idea, because the whale was hanging from the middle of the ceiling and it was quite a long way from any of the balconies, which was our best vantage point. The best we could do is guess that there may have been some bits of timber in there, for example. What we hadn't banked on was a lot of the kind of back end of the animal was actually made of plaster. And those vertebrae were very well made, but they had to be taken apart completely because they were literally plastered onto the steel frame which ran down the length of the animal. And there's no way to get them off without literally having to saw them in half and take them off.
And will you be able to use those original plaster casts again, or will you have to make new ones?
They've been taken apart in such a way that we could probably repair them and put them back together again. But to be honest, I think it would be better to make new ones. And with things like 3D printing and so on, there are ways of doing it which will be lighter.
And probably not plaster, but acrylic or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are plenty of other materials now. And again, if they're lighter weight and if they're a bit more robust, it just makes them a little bit safer.
What's the most unusual thing you've come across during this decant process?
I think the weirdest thing was one that Nigel found, actually, which was there was an electric hob, a new, unused electric hob sitting under the rhino skeleton.
How long was that there?
It's a good question. Probably at least 20 years, maybe 30. It was unexpected, to say the least.
Right, well, I'm going to finish off with Nigel. Nigel, when do you hope to open the doors again?
We expect to be able to open the ground floor of the museum sometime in early 2022. That depends on progress on the installation of the works on the uppermost floors of the building, because everything depends on scaffolding running the whole way through the building. Once we have a platform, a working platform for dealing with the roof, once that's in place, people can start working on the roof, and they'll have a building site above, and we'll have a sealed ceiling underneath that'll allow us to work away as curators on the floors below. And once we can do that, we can take away all the scaffolding, take away the props from the ground floor that are preventing access at the moment. We have to then put Giant Ear back towards the front, get their heads back on, and tidy up the ground floor. That's going to take at least a month of our time, as far as we can see. So we're not giving an exact date, but we're talking about the first quarter of 2022 that we'll be able to see people coming back into the ground floor of the museum.